Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today's video is another installment in our linguistics series. It is the third and final part of a video series about semantics, which is the study of meaning and the meaning of words. Today, I am talking about semantic shift and the invention of new vocabulary. So, how do the meanings of words change over time? And how do we develop new words and incorporate them into our lexicon? If you use slang, and I'm sure that you do, or if you've heard slang, which I know that you have, then you will be well accustomed to the concept of semantic shift or of new vocabulary invention. However, words change in a series of predictable ways, and that's what I'll be talking about today. So typically I work off of slides that I have printed out. However, my work printer was acting up, so I have my slides on my laptop today. I have turned the brightness down, so hopefully it won't blind you. But that's what we're working with today. So let's get straight to it. As I said, today we are talking about semantic shift and new vocabulary. Let's start with a little refresher from our part 1 video, which is what is semantics? Semantics is a branch of linguistics that is focused on meaning, the meaning of words, of sentences or utterances, and of the relationship between language and the world around us. So truth conditions, implicatures, etc., etc. What is meaning? So the function of language is to communicate. It is to communicate thoughts from my head and make them understandable to someone else. So to transmit meaning, to communicate meaning between two or more people. And morphology and syntax, which we've discussed in previous videos, or at least we've discussed morphology. We'll get to syntax. These allow us to combine meaningful parts, like stems, affixes, and words, to create bigger, meaningful parts, like words, phrases, and sentences. So I'll quickly go over this slide because we've seen it before, but a word's meaning is made up of its sense and its referent, that is to say, the mental representation of an expression's meaning, and potentially a real-world entity to which an expression refers. The mental picture you have that comprises meaning is the sense, and if there is a real-world representation of that expression, then that is the referent. Not all expressions have a reference. For example, things like Genovia, the King of the United States, leprechaun, unicorn, dragon. Not only fantasy things, but abstract concepts like joy, sadness, nostalgia have senses, but do not have a real world referent. So some words have both a sense and a referent, and some have just the sense. But why do the meanings of words change? Why isn't the meaning of words just something that is static and unchanging? One reason is metaphor. So a word may be used frequently in a figurative sense, or frequently used metaphor may cause a new association between two or more words. So a common turn of phrase may cause two words to become associated with each other, and they may lend their meanings to each other. Similarly, we have ellipses. So two words are used so frequently together that they begin to be associated with the same meaning. You can omit one word or elide one word, and it'll take on the partial meaning of the word that it is associated with. Disambiguation, which is kind of the opposite. So two or more words may refer to the same real-world reference or have the same meaning, and so one or both words develop a more specific or nuanced meaning. As we talked about in our first semantics video, there are very few true synonyms. Often, even if two words are alike in meaning, they have slight differences in nuance. This is an example of disambiguation, where two words may have started off very similar, but they developed more nuanced individual meanings. So, why else might the meanings of words change? There may be changes in reference. So not only does the sense of a word change, but there may be actual changes in the real world thing that something is referring to. So exactly, the real world thing that a word referred to has changed as there are cultural innovations, technological innovations, so on and so forth. For example, what is your first thought when you hear the word cart? C-A-R-T, cart. Is it a shopping cart? Is it a horse and cart? You likely see one of these much more frequently than you see the other. Or it may refer to even a more abstract version of that, like an online shopping cart. You can click a button that says add to cart, and there is no physical object that you're referring to, but you still know that it means somewhere you put shopping items, whether that's in an online sense or a physical sense. So, how does meaning change? Semantic change is when an existing word gradually changes in meaning from one meaning to a wholly different meaning. So an example we see is like cart, which previously referred to something that is drawn by a horse or oxen, and now refers to something that you push yourself, primarily something that you put items in, as opposed to a horse and cart, which you might put items or people in. So it can also be when a word gains additional meanings outside of the original usage. So sometimes a word's meaning just changes wholly, or it gains an additional meaning. So once again, back to the cart example, horse and cart did not lose its meaning. When you say cart, it might still refer to that old-timey horse and cart, but it gained an additional meaning to refer to a shopping trolley. And semantic change is not random. It follows certain trends, and that's what we're going to talk about next. And semantic change has always occurred. This is not a new phenomenon. This is not something that kids these days are doing. This is something that has always occurred in time immemorial. Words have changed and developed new or additional meanings. So one kind of common semantic change or semantic shift is when a word's meaning becomes more specific over time, and this is called narrowing. An example of narrowing is the word meat. When you think of the word meat, do you think more of the picture on the left or the picture on the right. So, meat is an example of narrowing. The word meat used to refer to any and all food. So it could be fish, it could be grains, it could be vegetables. And now meat refers to, well, meat. It refers to animal flesh or food, the muscle of an animal that you eat. So narrowing is when a word's meaning becomes more specific over time. We see the opposite happen, which is when a word's meaning becomes less specific over time. An example of this is the word Kleenex. Kleenex was developed as a brand name that referred to a specific brand of facial tissue, but now it can refer really to any tissue or facial tissue. If you say, hey, hand me a Kleenex, no one will say, actually, those are puffs. They would just hand you a tissue. Another example of broadening is actually the word guy. Guy used to specifically refer to Guy Fawkes or an effigy of Guy Fawkes, and now it can refer to any old guy. So broadening is the opposite of narrowing. It's when a word's meaning becomes less specific over time. Amelioration is when a word's meaning becomes more positive over time. An example of this is the word nice. Nice used to mean that someone was kind of foolish or naive. And now nice means that they are kind, that they are a good person. So amelioration is when a word's meaning becomes more positive. Of course, there is the opposite of that as well. Pejoration is when a word's meaning becomes more negative over time. An example of this is the word silly. Silly used to mean that someone was very pious or devout in their faith, and then it slowly changed to mean that someone was maybe overly naive, and now it means that someone is kind of silly or foolish. It did almost the exact opposite thing that nice did. So silly now means that someone's goofy, but it used to mean that someone was very pious. Sometimes semantic shift can occur in opposite directions with words that have similar origins. So words that have similar origins, we talked about disambiguation and how we don't want too many words that have the same meaning as each other. So for example, awesome and awful have similar origins, meaning they inspire awe in someone, and one underwent amelioration and one underwent pejoration. Similarly, terrible and terrific come from the root terrify, and one became more negative, one became more positive over time. So sometimes in order to disambiguate of words with similar meanings, they may undergo semantic shift in opposite directions. And finally, we have weakening, which is when a word's meaning becomes less intense over time. So we see this happening currently with words like amazing, awesome, fantastic. You might say that cake was awesome, which means that it was really good, but not necessarily that it inspires awe. We see this happen with things like love or hate, where someone might say, I loved that cake, and they mean they really liked it. Or I hate that thing, and it means they dislike it, but it has lost some of the intensity of its meaning. And of course, shift can happen not necessarily randomly, but it always doesn't fit cleanly into one of these categories. So shift occurs when any of these previous types of change occur, or when a word takes on a new meaning that may or may not be related to its original usage. And semantic shift often results in something called polysemy. We've talked about polysemy in a prior video, but it's when a word has two or more related but different meanings. Exactly. So for example, the word mouse may mean like a little fuzzy guy, or it could mean your computer mouse. A computer mouse was originally named because people thought it looked like the animal, and now they have related but different meanings. If someone says, I have 3 mice that I alternate between, you'd probably think they mean a computer mouse and not a creature. Similarly, different kinds of legs. We could have a chair leg, a pant leg, an actual leg, a chicken leg, etc. And they have related meanings, but they are still slightly different. Now, this answers how we get new meanings from existing words, but how do we go about creating new words? Well, there's a couple of different ways. One is affixation. We've talked about this one in the morphology video. So this is when we add affixes to create a new word. This is also called derivation. If you want to learn more about affixes, I recommend checking out my morphology videos. So for example, you could add ication to the end of something in order to make it a verb, like the Red Hot Chili Peppers song, Californication. You could also add ify to the end of something to make it a verb, or eyes to the end of something to make it a verb. We also have compounding, which is when a word is formed from 2 or more independent words. Examples are things like snowboard, blackbird, air conditioner, toothbrush, so on, so forth. All of these are made by just pressing 2 existing words together. In compound words, the stress is usually on the first word only, versus independent words where each word is stressed. Compare blackbird and blackbird. One is referring to the species of blackbirds, and one is just referring to a bird that is black. So stress changes depending on whether something is a compound word or 2 independent words. Snapchat, Facebook, etc. are examples of new compounds. Blending is similar, but is when we smush existing words together by overlapping or combining phonemes within a word. So things like Spanglish comes from Spanish and English, but they're not compounded, they're blended together. Finsta, so if you have like a fake Instagram. Brunch is breakfast and lunch. I love brunch. That's all I gotta say. Back formation is kind of similar, but back formation, or it's also called reanalysis, is when a word is broken up into smaller morphemes or the boundaries between morphemes are reanalyzed. A good example of this is the word alcoholic, which comes from alcohol and ick, as in like being like something. But this got broken into 2 different morphemes, alco and holic. And now we have this morpheme holic that you can attach to the end of verbs to indicate that someone is addicted to something. So you can be a chocoholic, a workaholic, etc. So this affix holic originally did not exist in this word, but it was reanalyzed to be two slightly different morphemes, and this new affix was invented that we can put on the end of words to indicate a compulsion or an addiction. Similarly, marathon was originally one full word referring to a place in ancient Greece, but now this athon ending can be put on the end of anything to indicate that you're doing it for a long period of time. So a hackathon, a streamathon, a danceathon, a walkathon, etc. have this athon suffix added to them that has its own meaning that it's developed over time. We see this also with like gait. So recently at the Olympics, there was boop gate, if you're familiar, where one of the curlers touched a rock when they weren't supposed to. Now gate is added to the end of anything to indicate a controversy. Like Deflategate, which I didn't really care about. Some historic examples are the words burgle, bartend, and swindler, which are back formed from nouns into verbs. The noun actually existed before the verb did, but they were reanalyzed into verbs. Acronyms you're probably familiar with, which are formed by taking the first letter or letters of words in a set of words or phrases. So things like NASA are spoken acronyms. We also have spelled acronyms, BRB, LOL, or LOL, depending on how you prefer to say it. And then we have clipping. Clipping is when we shorten individual words in order to create a new word which may or may not have a slightly different meaning than its lengthened form. So things like legit from legitimately, telephone from telephone, and condo from condominium. This shows that clipping can go in either direction. You can either clip the beginning or the end of a word. And sometimes there is a slightly different meaning between the clipped and unclipped form. For example, the recent slang word riz is a clipped form of charisma, but people would probably say that riz and charisma are slightly different things. Folk etymology is when an unfamiliar word or ambiguous construction is replaced by a more familiar word or words. This often happens when a word is introduced to English from another language. It may be replaced with something that sounds more familiar. So, for example, musquash is a Native American word. It was replaced with muskrat, which are two existing English words that were compounded to create the word muskrat. Same with crevesse, which became crayfish. This unfamiliar French word was replaced with two more familiar sounding English words. You can also hear this in things like eggcorns, which are kind of playful misunderstandings or mishearings of words. And finally, we have borrowing. Now, borrowing may lead to folk etymology, but borrowing is when a word from another language is adopted by speakers of a different language. English is full of borrowed words. We have tsunami from Japanese, ballet from French, gung ho from Chinese, barbecue, which is from the language Arawak, but we got it via Spanish, balcony from Italian, and words that are borrowed can become fully assimilated into the language to the point where it is not known that they are originally foreign words. I'd say it's things like, everyone knows that the word tsunami is Japanese, but maybe not everyone knows that balcony originally didn't exist in English and it was borrowed from Italian. And of course, we can just invent new words whole cloth. This happens frequently with brand names like Kleenex, Xerox, Google have become words in their own right, but people invent brand new words all the time, and if they catch on, they may get adopted into the more general vocabulary. Finally, the last thing I'd like to talk about is just a fun little exercise for tracking semantic shift. So if you go to the Oxford English Dictionary, they will show you all the different meanings of a word as far back as they have it recorded. So for example, if you go to oed.com and look up the word nice, it will show you the oldest recorded definition, which shows of a person foolish, silly, simple, ignorant. It also shows that it's now obsolete. The oldest recorded meaning of this they have is from around 1300. And then it will give you a more modern usage. So that one derives pleasure or satisfaction from, agreeable, pleasant, satisfactory, attractive. That sounds a lot more like how I would use the word nice in modern parlance. So that's just something fun you can do if you want to look up how the meaning of words change. Meanings of words change in a couple of predictable ways. We have narrowing, borrowing, amelioration, pejoration, and weakening. We can also invent new words in a bunch of different ways, but these are most of the ways that that the meanings of words change or new words are adopted into our vocabulary. This video was a little bit all over the place, but I hope that you enjoyed it. If there are other linguistic topics you would like me to cover, feel free to leave it in a comment down below. I love talking linguistics, and I know I'll do it in future videos. Thank you so much for watching, and for now, good night. Good night.